This video is brought to you by Soundcore. My opinions are my own. It is my opinion, let me make this exceptionally clear, that nobody really likes your Android phone.
What the hell does that mean?
Great question. First, let me define nobody real quick. Nobody is the vast majority of people or consumers who want to throw at least $1,000 American at a smartphone in 2023. And I said your to grab your attention whether you actually own a newer Android flagship or if you're somebody who tries not to. What remains is a potentially rhetorical question. What are people with this kind of money buying? Well, it's fair to say, for example, that Samsung is enjoying successful sales of the S23 series, especially in South Korea. We can also note that other non-Apple manufacturers quite obviously enjoy lots of sales and global market share due to dozens of models available and more accessible price points. But in this case, when people are looking to shell out a lot of money for the best, it's safe to say that people usually opt for one of these. But why? Are people, myself included, brainwashed? Is it all marketing, or is the iPhone just a better product? Well, for starters, I personally think the iPhone's design is just more thoughtful and human compared to its competitors. And that claim may seem completely delusional when you compare Apple's boring, unimaginative, nearly 3-year-old design language to that of Samsung, OnePlus, or Oppo at this point, Nothing, and other manufacturers. It almost seems like the fruit company isn't trying to design or redesign much at all. They tend to refine, tweak, change some colors up here and there, repackage, and say something along the lines of, "This is the greatest, most incredible iPhone we've ever made since iPhone." Frustrating, I know. In fact, when Apple pulled this stunt in 2016 with the 7 and 7 Plus, it was enough to get me to switch to Android. I know, shocking. Go ahead and look up my OnePlus 5 and 6 content. I was very passionate about Android at one point up until the XS Max came out and subtly stole my heart and $1,100 out of my wallet. Alright, so before you dislike and call me a fraud, I just want to say that I stand by everything I've said about Android in the past. I still love my OnePlus 6 and plan on upgrading to the 6T. I still think that Android is a superior operating system in a dozen different ways. I am not going to switch exclusively to iOS. I have several reasons to use both operating systems, which I will elaborate more on. And yeah, I just wanted to get that out of the way before you assumed that I just reconverted back to the Apple orthodoxy. I did not just jump back into the Garden of Eden. So yeah, clearly I was a closeted iPhone guy when this was shot and just a plain old closeted guy as well. I found that out later. Anyway, back to the video. While again, it's fair to say Apple is not exactly innovative with their design, the truth is an intense focus on redesign is just not part of their philosophy or DNA. I mean, sure, you can assume there's some capitalism mixed into their design or a more business model, but I'd argue they try really hard not to overly design their phones. The S23 Ultra and the Pixel 7 Pro, for example, make their hardware a bit of a spectacle. They look different, more advanced, have more ambitious camera modules, smaller front camera cutouts or hole punches, slimmer sides and sharper corners. And don't get me wrong, they look clean. I thought so the second I unboxed these. But this seems like design for the sake of design. Compared to the iPhone 14 Pro and 14 Pro Max, they are, at least to me, not as comfortable or ergonomic in the hand. The iPhone, while it does have sharper edges, is easier to grip onto due to them. Also, its rounded corners don't dig into your palms that much either and match the curved edges of the display, which has perfectly symmetrical bezels. The S23 Ultra and Pixel get pretty damn close, but no cigar with slightly larger bottom bezels, sadly. The iPhone's rounded corners also match iOS's app windows, elements, buttons, and more. The controversial dynamic island also plays into this aesthetic continuity, and though the feature isn't exactly revolutionary, it makes you forget you're dealing with or working around hardware. It hides the front camera and advanced facial recognition tech while also providing useful information about what's going on in the background. Whereas the hole punches on the Pixel, Ultra, and other handsets are kinda just there. And yeah, they definitely look better in some situations, especially when you're watching widescreen video, landscape, or horizontally, but the island has a purpose. It's part of the operating system, whereas the cutouts are consequences of having an edge-to-edge display on these phones. A sort of afterthought if you ask me, but what do I know? They designed the hardware exactly for the software, which is one of their deep-seated philosophies and unique competitive advantages. Whereas Samsung, Google, and other manufacturers design the hardware for appeal and vanity and then just sort of jam the software in and call it a day. But again, this is just my opinion. I'd argue that a more objective topic of discussion has to do with tech specs. And back in the day, this used to be an incredibly valid debate between passionate Apple and Android users. Take, for example, the iPhone 5 versus the Galaxy S4. In 2013, they were the best Apple and Samsung had to offer, but they were very different phones with very different value propositions. Apple was selling you a higher quality design or build and a cleaner user experience, if you can call the skeuomorphic iOS 6 that, whereas Samsung was clearly offering more raw bang for your buck with regard to hardware. There was no comparison between the iPhone 5's 4-inch sub 720p IPS panel compared to the S4's 1080p AMOLED panel. So impressive for the time. And though the Galaxy was made out of plastic and TouchWiz was kind of cheesy, albeit more customizable, you were getting quite a bit more for $649 off contract compared to the smaller, less advanced looking iPhone. You really had to believe in Apple as a company to forego all of the major hardware benefits that came with the S4. But nowadays, I mean, sure, while Samsung specifically leads the industry with fantastic display quality and brightness, probably the best, a 200 megapixel camera sensor, crazy optical camera zoom capability, and has incorporated the incredible Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 into the S23 series, which, by the way, for the first time in a while, outperforms Apple's latest chip graphically, the iPhone still stacks up pretty well hardware-wise. And sure, while it may lack some of these impressive tech specs, is it the biggest deal? Not really, because its display is already almost as big. It's super sharp, bright, and fast, and arguably prettier due to its curves and symmetrical bezels, like I said earlier. It also looks even better with one of my Skyline wallpapers. Check out my pack on Gumroad, linked in the video description. The A16 chip, while outperformed graphically by the 8 Gen 2, performs better computationally or CPU-wise as well, if that even matters. Not really. It also packs a fantastic camera setup, which may not be as advanced on paper, as we'll discuss a little later in this video, but it does the job and does it really well. Not to mention, even though the Pixel packs a fantastic design too, display, camera setup, etc., Google's in-house Tensor G2 chip is completely outperformed by the 8 Gen 2 and the A16. So again, in short, the iPhone no longer obviously lacks hardware-wise with an excuse of its software and ecosystem being better. Specs-wise, since 2018 or so, the iPhone has gotten damn near close, if not identical, to its highest-end competitors. In a few objective cases, it's even better, specifically with regard to battery performance or screen on time. Check out PhoneBuff's crazy thorough battery tests with the robot arm, so cool. The 14 Pro barely beats the S23 Ultra by 38 minutes and the 7 Pro by an impressive 2 hours. Nonetheless, screen on time, display quality, and performance shouldn't really be a concern of yours when choosing a smartphone in 2023. It's all equally perfectly competitive. If anything, the software and camera experiences are what presently differentiate phones. But regardless of what kind of phone you have or plan on buying, pairing it with amazing accessories is a must. That's why you need to consider picking up the Soundcore Motion X600, the best Bluetooth speaker I have ever encountered so far. This thing offers insane 50-watt punchy sound with incredible bass that you can increase with the push of a button. Soundcore has also worked hard to implement a spatial audio-like experience, lossless quality if you want to stream higher quality audio, and Bluetooth 5.3. Here's a little sound test for your reference. I'm using the Pro EQ feature in the Soundcore app, and I also enabled spatial audio with the button. See if you can hear the difference. It's also designed and crafted beautifully with a premium aluminum body, handle, and soft touch plastic. It's also IPX7 rated, meaning it can be submerged in up to a meter of water for 30 minutes. The handle also makes it super portable, so you can pick it up and place it down wherever you want, wherever you are. Not only that, it'll give you 12 hours of playback and charges via USB-C. Overall, this thing is like a mini hi-fi setup that's portable and is only a fraction of the cost. I'll leave a link in the video description if you're interested in checking the X600 out. But getting back to the video though, when it comes to camera performance, I mean, look, there's no denying the 7 Pro and the S23 Ultra are very impressive in their own rights. When it comes to photography specifically, both have fantastic hardware and computational and AI features or capabilities, and they have better optical zoom than the iPhone currently does. They also produce immediately more punchy, contrasty, vibrant, saturated photos straight out of camera. But let's spare ourselves an in-depth photo comparison between these three phones and cut to the chase. But if you do want to reference one of these comparisons, I'll link a few in the video description that I think are fair. Anyway though, from a purely on-paper innovation spec standpoint, Google and Samsung beat out Apple. I, for one, really enjoy the 10x optical lens on the Galaxy Ultra. It's super impressive regardless of what kind of phone you prefer. Despite these Android handsets having clear advantages though, I still have some potentially biased gripes. First up, something that still plagues non-Apple phones is a stickier or slower shutter button. You can just fire away with the iPhone more rapidly than you can with the Ultra and the Pixel. Do I know why? Not really. Maybe there's better optimization with iOS, who knows? More importantly though, even though the Pixel and Galaxy are again more immediately impressive when it comes to snapping photos and the processing, in my opinion, I think they're trying too hard. I mean, sure, there are circumstances where I'm gonna want the Pixel's low light capability or Samsung's low light capability, portrait computational photography, or the Galaxy's zoom features or 200 megapixels. The iPhone just nails all your more typical photos and focal lengths at ultra wide or 0.5x, 1x, 2x, and 3x pretty much every time and produces images that are just more true to life. Creators have also described the iPhone image quality as more color accurate, which is important if you want to preserve a memory more accurately without shooting raw or grading anything out of camera yourself. Not to mention the iPhone's 48 megapixel photos are really sharp, which makes me think you don't necessarily need 152 extra megapixels to produce something highly detailed as well. And on such a small 1/1.13 sensor size, 200 megapixels worth of pixels seems like kind of a waste. The individual pixels are so small that you cannot appreciate them the same way you could on a full frame or medium format camera. I also find the ProRAW photos from the iPhone's 48 megapixel sensor comparable or maybe a tad less sharp to the Ultra's 200 megapixel photos, but damn near close and with less weird processing and sharpening. All the same can be said about the photos with the front cameras, although I will say the iPhone's does let in more light with an f1.9 aperture, which is likely helpful for making a cleaner image. As for smartphone video though, even though the S23 Ultra packs the 10x optical zoom, which does an amazing job shooting truly telephoto video, and impressive 8K 30 recording capability, the iPhone still comes out on top. I don't quite know how to put it, but the footage just looks more normal or better or less processed. I don't know. It's the closest you can get to something out of a mirrorless camera in my opinion. Although you can still see artifacts and graininess you get with smartphones and camera sensors, or those small sensors in general. And just like with photos, Apple doesn't overly process their video. I mean, sure, there's a lot going on behind the scenes, a lot of artificial dynamic range stuff happening, etc., but the footage just looks natural, true to life, and color accurate once again. But don't get me wrong, the Pixel and Galaxy give you great video, 8K video even, and potentially better stabilization. But they just try hard to make the footage look amazing straight out of camera, yet lack that Apple movie magic or whatever that I can't put my finger on quantitatively. But hey, what do I know? I'm just an Apple fanboy, probably. But nonetheless, again, I recommend you watch an in-depth camera comparison yourself if you really want to get a feel for what you like and what you don't. Don't necessarily take my word for it. However, I and many others just personally default to the iPhone when we want to capture life as accurately and smoothly as possible. I think the shot on iPhone ad campaigns and endless iPhone captured content online speaks for itself. And even more specifically for my own creative niche usage cases, I enjoy being able to shoot both photos and videos that look great out of camera without being too noticeably processed, so I can do more of it myself at my own discretion. And to be fair, you can shoot raw photos with all three of these devices. I'm just talking about straight up HEICs, HEIFs, and HEVC video with Apple's standard processing. Enough with camera though, now let's talk about software and operating systems. Pull out the pitchforks and torches if you haven't already, because a lot of you are not going to like what I have to say or what I may fail to mention or give Android operating systems and manufacturers credit for. I'm not here to lecture you about the Apple ecosystem or iMessage or kiss Apple's ass talking about security or privacy though. All I'll say is iOS is created with more thought and care. Like I said about design, it complements the software and the software complements the hardware. Yes, it glitches here and there. I've heard a lot of complaints about iOS 16 and I'm sure they're valid, but for the most part, at least in my experience, it's smooth sailing. Not only that, but nearly every interface, button, menu, window, animation is meticulously crafted and executed, which creates this vibe I just don't get with any flavor of Android I've ever used. Even my favorite, which was Oxygen OS back with the OnePlus 5 and 6. And that's not to say that stock Android or One UI or other operating systems aren't smooth, they just are not as refined or curated in my opinion. While they are more customizable and pack more features, and this was a huge deal back in the day, once again when iOS was even more locked down and bare bones, With the launch of iOS 16, I think iPhone is at least a quarter as customizable, which is to say a lot compared to what it used to be, while of course retaining the curated, clean, symmetrical order that is iOS. And I think for many, including myself, this is enough. I like my widgets, I like the order, but to each their own. I definitely respect those of you who want near infinite customizability with your smartphone, which unfortunately isn't matched with near infinite updates. Okay, infinite is a bit of an exaggeration, but on average, an iPhone gets 6 years of OS updates, correct me if I'm wrong. Take the iPhone 8 and 8 Plus and 10, for example, which are due to get iOS 17, even as they turn 6 years old later this year. Meanwhile, in Dave 2D's review of the Pixel 7 Pro, absolutely no shade to him, by the way, he's great. I just found this really funny. He was excited to hear that Google, the company that literally creates the Android operating system, is going to provide the handset with, get this, a whole 3 years of software updates. Again, they make the phone, they make the software. Am I missing something? Customizability and software features aside though, this is terrible and is one of the reasons why I think people opt for the iPhone. Apple's handsets age much more gracefully and retain their resale value better because of the company's long-term support for them. But before we come to a final, somewhat predetermined and very biased verdict here, I want to give Android phones and manufacturers a little more credit and talk about the things they still do better, for now at least. Once again, Android operating systems give you far more control over the OS with regard to customizability and aesthetics, which may or may not be a big deal to you. Most popular high-end Android handsets also feature this amazing tech called USB-C, have you heard of it? Which puts Apple to shame with their nearly 11-year-old 5-pin lightning connector, which they've been milking for far too long. Android phones also offer more unique hardware features, like the S Pen in the S23 Ultra, which is handy. Also a little goofy in my opinion. Just like foldables, particularly flippables like the Razr and the Z Flip, which force you to open your phone just to use it properly, all while giving you a nice gross crease and a plastic display you can easily scratch if you're not careful enough. Did I also mention they run Android? I'm kidding, not really. Android phones also have more ambitious camera features. I'll say this again, the 10x optical with the S23 Ultra and 5x optical with the Pixel are amazing, soon to be copied by Apple though. File management is also better, at least when it comes to copying files to and from your phone, which you can essentially treat like a flash drive, not in the case with the iPhone, which is really annoying alongside no high-speed USB-C connectivity. And finally, there's just more Android options out there. There's a phone for everything and everybody, from foldables to crazy gaming phones from Asus. So if you are in fact a niche user, you have a lot to choose from, not to mention many price points to accommodate your budget. But with all this said though, would you put serious money towards these benefits, specific specs and features like 100x zoom, or towards a product that is just super well-rounded, long-lasting and refined? Again, in my opinion, for most, if you got a band, $1,000 to throw at a phone, though the offerings from Samsung, Google, and others look fantastic, as of 2023, I still think you're better off buying an iPhone, especially a 15 series coming out later, which supposedly is going to adopt USB-C, wow, thanks to the EU, and proper telephoto or zoom lenses like those found in the S23 Ultra and 7 Pro. I'll also leave you with a question, albeit this is more for the Apple users in the audience. If somebody paid you $10,000, would you give up using the iPhone for the rest of your life? My own answer is absolutely not, to no one's surprise. You'd have to probably add another 0 or 2 to pay me off, and even then I'd really be missing my iPhone. Not because I'm a diehard Apple fanboy, although you can be the judge of that. It's just that your phone, or at least in my case, my phone is such an important keystone in my personal and professional life, which is why I encourage you to choose whatever you think is best. So yeah, that's my hot take. I don't think anybody really likes your Android phone, at least in mass. I think market share data might back me up on this, at least when it comes to people buying pricier $1,000+ flagships. I didn't come up with this conclusion overnight either. I had to, believe it or not, be an absolute Apple fanboy first about 10 years ago, then convert to Team Android for a few years, only to find my way back into the Garden of Eden, albeit with a more nuanced perspective. In my 15 or 16 years of obsessing over smartphones and consumer tech, it seems to me that Apple often, if not always, provides less quantity, but at a higher quality or level of refinement. Not in every case they screw up, but the iPhone at least speaks for it and really sells itself. But, you know, feel free to disagree. I'm sure many of you will. I don't mind. I'd love to hear what you have to think in the comments and elsewhere. Check out my links to my wallpaper pack Skyline and the Anker X600 in the description. And once again, my opinions in this video are mine and mine alone. And as always, I'm Noah, and I will catch you all in the next one.